So, hi everyone. My name is Erin Glass. I'm a developer educator at DigitalOcean, and I'll be hosting today's discussion, Distributed Learning in the Cloud. We'll be talking about some exciting EdTech projects made possible by self-managed cloud environments. So, as you may know, it's a pivotal time for educational technology. On the one hand, it's more important than ever before, given the conditions of the pandemic. On the other hand, there's growing concern about the ways some of these technologies violate student privacy, reproduce social biases, or simply don't support educational goals and values very well. But that doesn't mean EdTech has to do those things. My guests today are working on projects that demonstrate an exciting, ethically minded, and joyful approach to educational technology that points the way to a better EdTech future. We'll hear from them about their projects and how self-managed cloud environments enable them to explore these alternative approaches to EdTech. First, we'll hear from Casey Holman, the Deputy Director of the CUNY Humanities Alliance, a partner program between the CUNY Graduate Center and LaGuardia Community College in New York City. Casey and Inez Vano Garcia, a former fellow of the program, will talk about how the program uses the cloud to support public and collaborative forms of teaching and learning. And then we'll hear from the folks at Reclaim Hosting, the indie edtech company that uses DigitalOcean's products to support edtech projects like Casey's. Co-founders Jim Groom and Tim Owens, along with Director of Operations Lauren Broomfield, will give us an inside look at Reclaim Hosting's unique approach to edtech. So welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you. And I'll turn it over to Casey now.
Thank you so much for having me, Erin, and for having me and Inez here from CUNY Humanities Alliance. So the Humanities Alliance, with generous support of the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, enables graduate students to learn about the most successful methods for engaging in humanities education in community colleges, and with some of the country's most diverse students, while simultaneously broadening access to the humanities for those undergraduates. All of our work is done within the City University of New York, or CUNY, and in particular between the Graduate Center and 4 community colleges: Hostos, Gutman, Borough of Manhattan, and LaGuardia Community Colleges. For those who don't already know, the City University of New York is the nation's largest urban public university, including 25 colleges and serving 300,000 degree-seeking students each year. The university's mission is to provide a first-rate public education to all students, regardless of means or background. And it does just that. 44% of all CUNY students are the first generation in their family to go to college. And CUNY has a pretty even distribution of Black, Latinx, Asian, and white students, which is frankly unheard of at most higher education institutions. According to an often cited quote from the New York Times, CUNY propels almost 6 times as many low-income students into the middle class and beyond as all 8 Ivy League campuses, plus Duke, MIT, Stanford, and Chicago combined. So across these 25 campuses and incredibly dynamic learning institutions, you can imagine there's a lot of technology supporting that infrastructure. And I honestly don't believe any one person can represent that technology being utilized across all those campuses. In fact, CUNY has its own technology conference every year that I believe is open to public participants and technology partners as well. A couple of the systems that are widely used on CUNY campuses are Blackboard, Digication's ePortfolio system, and of course, WordPress. More and more OER tools and resources are being shared every day. But when we talk about WordPress at CUNY, which is what our program uses to support our work, we have to talk about the Academic Commons, which was started in 2009 as a growing hub for the CUNY community to foster conversation and collaboration across teachers, scholars, administrators, and open source projects generally across the different campuses. More than 5 years ago now, they also created and distributed Commons in a Box so that folks could sort of take that infrastructure for themselves and run with it, which is exactly what we did for the CUNY Humanities Alliance. As an academic who is a highly proficient user of technology, but not a developer, I wouldn't think to go anywhere else but Reclaim Hosting for my hosting needs. And since its creation, it's, I think, quickly become a top pick among academics for our hosting needs, mostly because they make it super easy for us. So our network site, CUNY Humanities Alliance, you can see on this front screen here, it has a few functions. So the first is to have this sort of parent site where we can do all of our blogging, we can post resources or announcements, we can post about the courses that are being developed by all of our graduate fellows. But we also needed an ability to post for the graduate students themselves to create their own course sites within our network. So folks would register with a site and be able to access their assignments for English or their fundamentals of speech communication, blogging assignments that they had. And the students did so much creation and commenting and interaction on these sites as part of their work in these courses. So I have with me actually Inez Baño Garcia, who is one of our graduate teaching fellows. And she's gonna actually present about her work and her course that she developed in her last semester.
Thank you, Casey. Thank you for the invitation. I'm here as a user educator to share my experience teaching with the CUNY Academic Commons. I've been using the CUNY Academic Commons because it aligns with my open pedagogy, and I'm positioning myself as someone who has learned by experimenting with the tools and the platforms, but someone who didn't have any previous technological or digital educational background before. So in my class, Linguistic Landscapes, Unpacking Language Hierarchies, I collaborated with Ryan Seslow, a visual artist pedagogue, to explore how languages and languages practices influence the way that we interact with people and how language relates to our role in society. As a community, together with my students, we were critical researchers and creators of a public-facing digital storytelling, investigating the multilingual sociolinguistic ecology of Jackson Heights in Queens. First, the CUNY Academic Commons gave us the opportunity for public-facing engagement, something that it was not possible with other learning management systems. And you mentioned Blackboard, for example. My students were able to share their work, in this case, their digital storytelling, with an audience outside the class. And they had an impact not just in their own institution, but in their community at Jackson Heights. Their work also is public and accessible to different audiences, even if they graduate. So after graduating, they have access to their work, something that I know that doesn't happen with other management systems. At the same time, the Commons allow students to experiment and produce knowledge beyond the traditional text type essay. They were able to create multimodal artifacts. You just saw different GIFs and images that the students created, and they were also able to create podcasts with Audacity. Moreover, the CUNY Commons fosters an environment where students were able to acquire digital skills, these transferable skills that they are able to use in other courses, but also along their career. In this case, my students were able to record, edit, archive their work. And in this way, I just want to finish saying that this platform, the CUNY Academic Commons, supported not just my open pedagogy, but it also allowed me to experiment through creative modes of research, expression, knowledge production, and public scholarship. Thank you, Casey.
Great. I always get fired up when I hear people from CUNY talk, so forgive me if I'm already getting fired up, but I am going to change gears a little bit and talk about, as Erin I don't know, I find it great, as she so generously described us as an indie educational technology company, and that's Reclaim Hosting. We were born out of our former lives at the University of Mary Washington as educational technologists, and we provide shared hosting to over 10,000 students and educators worldwide. And we work with over 100 institutions, several of them within the CUNY system. And we provide integrated web hosting for campus communities, as well as individual faculty, students, researchers, et cetera. And as Casey noted, and thank you, Casey, we're probably best known for our support. We try and make things as seamless and as simple as possible. And given the fact that we've spent, collectively 20 to 30 years working within higher ed before we started Reclaim Hosting, we have a really good idea of what people in this space need and how we can provide that. The fact is our love affair with DigitalOcean is already well documented by Lisa Tagliaferri, who was kind enough to actually interview Tim and I to talk about the fact that starting in 2016, finishing in 2018, we moved our entire server infrastructure over to the DigitalOcean cloud. We now have over 150 virtual private servers on the cloud, and we couldn't be happier. The thing is, as a small company like ours, we have 7 people total, and we doubled our size in the last year and a half. So you're actually looking at half the company during this presentation. We needed the ability to run a faster infrastructure, but also we needed SSD servers that had block storage. Up and until block storage was kind of introduced at DigitalOcean, we couldn't use them. As soon as it was, and thank you forever at DigitalOcean did that, it enabled us to actually not only move our fleet over, but scale our fleet pretty seamlessly, which was nice. The migration of our infrastructure to DigitalOcean, interestingly enough, was completed in 2018. And that's the same time when we were able to actually, I'm sorry, I cannot stress strongly enough how it was for us to be able to leverage the vast technical expertise and ongoing innovations afforded by the move. So let me just point that. But I got ahead of myself because I wanted to talk a bit about how pleasantly surprised we were in 2018 when we had finished our migration to DigitalOcean, where we found that DigitalOcean was dropping all of their prices. In fact, we got twice the RAM and often CPU with twice the disk space for the same amount, effectively cutting our costs in half for providing our infrastructure. And this was huge for us because we're a super small company, 7 employees or 7 people total, and we're operating pretty close to the bone when it comes to the profit margin. So in order to compete, and this price cut enabled us to not only avoid increasing our prices, but in several cases, lower our prices for institutional clients who we could actually tell them, you know what, your infrastructure is going to cost less monthly. So that was gigantic. And all that said, we've begun to feel the limits, though, of our actual infrastructure. And this is actually a point that Lauren is going to pick up on because we are predominantly a cPanel-based infrastructure and or LAMP-based infrastructure. And we have now, as a result, started to feel the limits given the fact that higher education has very different and developing demands and needs. So Lauren, take it away.
Yes, thank you, Jim. I'm here to kind of talk about cPanel. So let's start there first. Thanks to being able, putting cPanel on our digital hosting or DigitalOcean servers, I guess. It's a web hosting standard, right? It served us well for some time as a base for most of our hosting offerings. It's familiar, it's cost effective for our users. We're able to customize it for institutions, so we can move sections around and add a logo and embed it based on what our communities need. It's got great one-click installers, makes it super simple for getting sites spin up pretty quickly. And it's also sort of a one-stop shop, right? It's a managed suite that includes email, DNS, applications, the works. I think, so it's not really going anywhere. It's been great so far, but in recent years, especially as Jim was saying, there's been this need for tools outside of the cPanel environment, outside of the Linux environment. So with that, we have folks like Digits that are adding to the conversation through what it could mean for digital scholarship to think beyond cPanel, to think beyond this LAMP environment. The Digits project was funded by a Carnegie Mellon grant in 2017. And they have been aiming to bridge this gap between print and digital scholarship by using software containerization, actually. And as a Digits advisory board member, I got a firsthand look into what it will take to support and maintain projects outside of the LAMP environment, but then also reproduce and preserve these web-based digital tools and digital scholarship for years to come. So what will these projects look like 5 years from now, 50 years from now even? And as a result of hearing challenges like this over the last few years, I think we at Reclaim Hosting have been grappling with questions like, how are we going to offer environments to make this possible? How are we as the hosting provider going to meet this need? And so that's kind of led into this new phase of brainstorming, and I think moving to something beyond cPanel to a container-based system. We've obviously tried to do what we can within cPanel. We're thinking about this site archive utility, which would allow users to easily convert their sites to static HTML. Doesn't work super great for all applications, and it doesn't necessarily preserve the experience of interacting with a digital project in its intended environment. We've even looked at outside tools like Web Recorder, which allows a user to record themselves walking through a site. Still not super scalable. And we've even installed Cloud Linux on our DigitalOcean servers as a way to offer things like Node.js, Python, Ruby. But there's limited support with cPanel, and it's highly complex to spin up in cPanel. And so I think as a result, with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Tim now to talk more about our efforts with widening our range of hosting options beyond the Linux environment and how we've explored software containerization further.
Awesome. Yeah. So if Jim got to talk about the past and the current, and Lauren talks about the current a lot, I get to talk a lot more about the future, which is fun. So our search for container-based solutions led us to a platform as a service offering called Jelastic. And we actually found we could spin this up right in the marketplace of DigitalOcean. So it was a no-brainer. This is just an example of where virtualization has allowed us to move quickly and spin up projects that we know our community of academics are asking for. So now with a true platform as a service offering, we're able to see the possibilities of Docker containers and other, programming languages in a way that allows almost limitless possibilities. We can offer programming languages that go beyond the traditional LAMP stack that cPanel was kind of limited to. Advanced applications like GitLab and Mattermost are no longer limited to people who have server expertise, which I think is where we excel. We can also build advanced environments with multiple containers utilizing load balancers, network file systems, Redis cache stores. This was the cloud as it's meant to be, in my opinion, rather than just a buzzword. And so that also leads us to other really interesting projects. Now that we have a true platform as a service offering for our customers, it gives them true software freedom. And now we can experiment with exciting things like EASY. EASY stands for Scaling Emulation as a Service Infrastructure. And it's built on the work that Yale was doing with the Emulation as a Service group to provide an infrastructure framework for hosting and preserving digital artifacts. And so with the use of emulation in the cloud, no longer would you have to archive digital files and projects as static copies like PDF files or HTML. You could actually take, for example, a Word document that was written in 1999, load it in Windows 98 on Microsoft Word 97 and provide a real-time version of that artifact as it was meant to be seen. Or, for example, a Macromedia file that somebody has living on a CD in their drawer, Macromedia Director, for example, and you could actually see these in the environments as they were intended. So these are kind of the exciting projects. And for us, it opens up a whole new world of possibilities to education. And for us, taps into the true potential of cloud computing in the 21st century.
That was fantastic, everyone. It is so inspiring to hear about all the different ways you can really deploy educational technology in these self-managed environments. So thank you. We have some time for a few follow-up questions. And so the first thing I want to ask from each of your different perspectives, what would you say to someone, an educator that is not very technically oriented? What would you say is the biggest benefit of using these sorts of technologies as opposed to sort of traditional ed tech often supplied by institutions?
I mean, I'm happy to start actually. So I think there's a couple of things that are really huge. One, the ease of use is really essential. I think for non-technical folks, being able to click WordPress and click install, and it's sort of up and in the cloud already for you is brilliant and amazing. It also allows so many different people to access. And access, broadly understood, is really important to us because we have students who don't have great bandwidth, who are looking at websites and stuff on their phones. I mean, it's really difficult to get to Blackboard or sometimes even Digication while you're, on your mobile on the train. So I think especially for humanities folks or who aren't sort of tech savvy, WordPress for us allows us the ease of use and sort of the general access for whoever needs to be at different user levels, but still without losing the grit. Like, we can get into the CSS and PHP if we need to, right? Like, or we can get a developer in or get a partner in to help us change things and modify them if we need to. Yeah.
I love
Picking
that.
up in, sorry, Jim,
Yeah,
go
and that's,
ahead.
no, please go right
No,
ahead.
I mean, I just wanted to pin up on what Casey was saying, just making sure all my students were able, half of them, to do all the work and everything they created that you just saw with their smartphone. They didn't have a laptop in class at home. They didn't have, some of them didn't have connectivity. They were not able to find to have Wi-Fi at their homes. So they were able to basically do everything, do all the assignments just with their cell phone while they were doing the work in their institution, LaGuardia. So I would say yes, accessibility, and also kind of giving them a voice outside their classes and outside their institution. I think that that's really important in a way to showcase the work that they are doing, is knowledge that they are producing, with the rest of the world, basically.
No one ever built their portfolio on Blackboard, right?
No.
Whereas, 30% of the web is driven by WordPress. So
Exactly.
you have a real tool that students could say, oh, wait, I can build this for my parents, store. I can do this for myself. So it's just a brave new world of awesome.
Right. I think it gives users a sense of ownership that they can build and create while they're in the classroom, but then take with them when they leave and continue to expand and grow their digital identity. And kind of like Casey was saying, you have the ability as a beginner user to install an application with a single click, and you're very quickly getting in on the ground floor. But then you can also pop open the hood of your website and go into File Manager and see the files as you're installing plugins in your dashboard and see how those correspond. So I think just the digital literacy component is super crucial too, that not only are we learning to build inside an application and what that will mean as just a skill going forward, but then we can also see what that looks like on the back end. So,
and I think it takes a village. It takes a community of practice. You have to have that support at all levels. CUNY supporting the faculty, supporting the students, Reclaim Hosting supporting the institutions, everybody supporting each other in a way where people who come to that fresh feel like, I can do this because I know I'm surrounded by people who are going to help me when things go wrong. You have to expect with technology, nothing's going to be perfect. Nothing's going to be, 100% great. And it's knowing I've got other folks who've done this before. They've tread these paths and they know what works and what doesn't, and they're going to help me. That it rises everybody up, I think.
I have definitely blown up my site more than once in the last 4 years.
It's a rite of passage.
I'm so on it. They get me back up in a couple of minutes, which is fantastic. I also just wanted to add a final note that the impact of these tools is really profound, right? So we had 27 grad students over 4 years. We taught around 75 courses in our program with about 2,000 students. And sort of more than half of them were engaged in these online courses. And so we showed a very small bit, and we're just one center, right? We're one small center at CUNY that's doing work with Reclaim Hosting and on WordPress, right? And so, and through them, DigitalOcean as well. And so the numerical impact of a very simple infrastructure is immense.
And I can't stop. But whenever you talk about CUNY, I get excited. But like CUNY built their infrastructure around open source with the Academic Commons or WordPress. They did stuff like Manifold, which we can then run on Reclaim Cloud, because that's not in the LAMP environment, but we can spin it up through a Docker image. So the fact that you all invested, the biggest city public university in the US, in open source is kind of, to Erin's point, an ethical investment, and an investment in, one of the things that excited me, Erin, when you were getting, starting at DigitalOcean, was talking about Jitsi and talking about the fact that we have, questions about surveillance and all these issues with some of the other tools. And what about an open source tool that maybe gives you some control over that? I think that was always the allure of open source from the beginning. And I love that CUNY, still has to deal with the institution and has to deal with Blackboard and all that. But there are pockets of awesome resistance there that have built an ecosystem that is truly amazing. So I love that.
Yeah, honestly, the only reason I've still heard of people using Blackboard is for their grading tool. So if a developer out there wants to fix that and make a WordPress grading tool, oh my gosh, Blackboard would be done for. Okay.
Well, I could hear you all talk all day. This is just really inspiring and motivating. We're at time, so I'm going to have to wrap it up. But thank you so much, everyone. I'm excited to share this with the world, and I can't wait to see your projects grow. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.